The champagne glass slipped from my daughter-in-law's hand the second she hit the floor. Amanda's mother, Nancy, was convulsing on my kitchen tiles, foam gathering at the corners of her mouth. People were screaming, chairs scraped back, and all I could think was that the drink wasn't meant for her. If you're listening to this, follow and tell me where you're from. My name is Karen Miller. I'm 70 years old, and I didn't survive the cutthroat world of business by being stupid. You notice when someone tries to poison you at your own retirement party. Especially when that someone has been eyeing your bank account like a starving person staring at a buffet. 2 hours earlier, everything looked perfect. The house smelled like roses and champagne. I just sold my consulting firm for $23 million. Not bad for a company I built from nothing after my husband died 15 years ago. My son, Jason, had insisted on throwing this party. He said I deserved to celebrate and that Amanda would handle everything. I should have known something was wrong the moment Amanda offered to host. The same woman who whined about cleaning up dinner plates was suddenly arranging flowers, polishing crystal, and fluttering around like the perfect homemaker. I had to admit, she did a good job. The house looked lovely. There were about 30 guests, old business associates, a few neighbors, and family. She'd even hired a bartender. "Nothing's too good for you, Karen," she said earlier, gripping my arm with those glossy, expensive nails of hers. I was making small talk with my former business partner when I saw it. Amanda standing by the champagne table, checking over her shoulder before pulling out a small dark vial from her purse. My stomach turned to ice as I watched her pour the contents into a single glass, the one with the tiny chip in the rim that I always used. I didn't panic. I didn't shout. I just kept talking, pretending to care about whatever nonsense my partner was saying about the economy. Years in business had taught me one important rule: you catch snakes by letting them think you're harmless. Amanda picked up the glass she'd tampered with and came toward me, her face full of fake concern. She said I looked tired and that I should have a drink, that I'd earned it. I smiled, thanked her, and took the glass. Then I waited. 10 minutes later, while she was busy showing off her new bracelet to the neighbors, I quietly set the glass down next to Nancy's purse on the counter. Nancy turned just in time to see it. Poor woman never could resist a drink at a party. She took it without hesitation and raised it to her lips. Within minutes, she commented that the champagne tasted bitter. I smiled and told her it must be a fancy bottle Amanda picked out. 5 minutes later, Nancy hit the floor. Chaos followed. Guests shouted, someone called 911, Amanda dropped to her knees next to her mother, shrieking for help. She was crying hard, clutching Nancy's hand, making a real show of it. To anyone else, she looked terrified. But to me, it was theater. The thing about fake panic is that it never quite lines up with the real thing. Jason shoved his way through the crowd, his face pale, his voice cracking as he asked what had happened. Amanda clung to my arm, stammering that Nancy had just collapsed out of nowhere. The paramedics arrived fast. As they worked, I studied Jason's face. 32 years of motherhood meant I could read every flicker of emotion he had. Beneath the shock, I saw something else, worry mixed with calculation. He glanced at Amanda, just for a second, but it was enough. I asked the paramedics where they were taking Nancy. Green Valley Medical Center, they said. I told them I'd follow. Jason jumped in quickly, insisting I didn't need to go, that they'd handle everything, that I should stay home and rest. How thoughtful of him to keep me in one place while they figured out what went wrong with their plan. Nonsense, I said. Nancy's practically family. I'm coming. I grabbed my keys before anyone could object. At the hospital, I kept my distance but listened closely. The doctors said it looked like poisoning. They mentioned something about plant alkaloids, rare, slow-acting, hard to trace. Amanda paced the waiting room, heels tapping against the linoleum like a clock counting down her nerves. Jason sat still, his phone buzzing every few seconds, but he didn't answer a single call. This is awful, Amanda kept saying. Poor mom. How could this happen? I rested a hand on her shoulder, calm as ever. Things like this are strange, I told her. I'm sure the doctors will figure it out. Lucky she didn't drink much of that champagne, just a few sips before she collapsed. Amanda froze for half a second. Then she said, "You think it was the champagne?" I shrugged. Probably nothing, just an old woman connecting dots that don't exist. But her face went a shade paler, and her hands shook as she lifted her coffee. Jason said nothing, just watched us both like he was trying to read the wind. Hours later, a doctor came out and said Nancy was stable. Whatever she'd swallowed was working its way out of her system, but she'd need to stay overnight. Amanda asked if we could see her. The doctor said no, family only, and she was sedated. As we walked out, Jason turned to me, saying maybe I should stay with them that night, that he'd feel better if I wasn't alone. I smiled. How kind. How convenient. That's sweet, I said, but I'll be fine. I have that new security system, remember? I kissed his cheek and got into my car. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing close in the parking lot, whispering furiously. Back home, I opened a fresh bottle of champagne, poured myself a glass, and sat in my study. The house was quiet. Peaceful. Someone had tried to kill me. Not a stranger. Not an enemy. My own family. I'd spent my life fighting off corporate sharks, men who underestimated me, rivals who wanted what I built. But this betrayal was something else. I took a slow sip and looked out at the dark garden my husband once tended. They thought I was old, weak, easy to remove. They were wrong. This time, the game was mine to play. By the next morning, the fear had settled into something sharper. Focus. I barely slept, too busy going over every detail from the night before, every glance, every word. The poison. The glass. The way Jason kept avoiding eye contact. I wasn't imagining any of it. Someone had meant to kill me, and that someone was now pretending to care how I was feeling. The phone rang at 7:30. It was Amanda. She said she couldn't sleep all night, that she'd been thinking about me, worrying I might have felt sick too. Her voice was soft, syrupy, too controlled. She mentioned the doctors thought Nancy probably just had a reaction to her medication. Maybe she'd taken something on an empty stomach. Nancy Brooks was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. The woman labeled her pill containers by the hour and carried a backup list in her purse. I knew she hadn't mixed anything up. That's such a relief, I told Amanda, pretending to sound tired. I'd hate to think it was something at the party. Amanda jumped on the line too quickly, insisting it definitely wasn't. The doctors said it wasn't food poisoning or anything from the drinks. Just one of those things, she said, trying to sound casual. Her words told me everything I needed to know. She wanted to bury that champagne bottle fast. After I hung up, I walked into the kitchen and stared at it sitting on the counter, 3/4 full, looking innocent as ever. I wondered how long it would take for a private lab to test it. Not because I needed proof for myself. I already knew. But evidence might be useful later. At 9, the doorbell rang. Jason stood on my porch holding a box of pastries from my favorite bakery, smiling like a dutiful son. Thought you might want breakfast, he said, stepping inside. You probably didn't eat much after all that last night. He moved around my kitchen like he always had, knowing exactly where everything was. He poured coffee, found plates, smiled like the boy I'd raised. And it hit me, how strange it felt to look at your child and see a stranger wearing his face. He sat down across from me and asked how I was holding up. I said I was fine, that it would take more than a little excitement to shake me. He smiled at that, but his eyes didn't match the expression. That's what I was afraid of, he said quietly. I waited, letting the silence press him. He cleared his throat and started again, telling me he and Amanda had been talking about my situation. My situation, I repeated, though I already knew where this was going. He leaned forward, his tone serious now. Mom, you're 70, living alone in this big house, with all that money from the sale. It just seems like a lot for one person to handle. There it was. The setup. The start of whatever trap they were building next. I told him I appreciated his concern, that I'd been managing just fine. But he didn't back down. Have you though, he said, running a hand through his hair. What if something happened to you like last night? What if you collapsed and no one found you? The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Using their failed murder attempt as an example of why I needed their protection. Jason, I said calmly, Nancy collapsed at a party full of people. She was treated within minutes. That's hardly a warning about living alone. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. He looked nervous now, the way he used to when he was a teenager trying to convince me to co-sign a loan he knew I'd refuse. Look, Amanda and I have been researching. There are some really great communities for active seniors. Places with staff, activities, people around all the time. So that was the angle. Get me out of my home, somewhere they could monitor me, or finish what they'd started without witnesses. How thoughtful, I said. I assume you already have a place in mind. Actually, yes, he said, pulling out his phone. It's called Oak Ridge Haven. Just 20 minutes from our house. They have beautiful grounds, medical staff, even a spa. It's more like a resort than a nursing home. He turned the screen toward me. The website showed photos of smiling retirees, playing bridge, swimming in indoor pools, living their best golden years. They all looked comfortable, tranquil, even. Probably because none of them knew they'd just handed over their freedom. Jason went on, explaining how there was a waiting list, but that they could get me in quickly if we paid the full entrance fee up front, about $400,000. That would cover housing and care for life. $400,000. That would be the perfect excuse to access my accounts. And once I was moved in, who would control my assets? My legal decisions? It sounded less like a retirement plan and more like a hostile takeover. I smiled. It sounds lovely, I said. But this house holds too many memories of your father. I'm not sure I'm ready to leave yet. Mom, Dad's been gone 15 years, Jason said softly. Don't you think it's time to start a new chapter? For a second, my chest tightened. If I hadn't seen Amanda pour poison into my glass, I might have believed him. His voice was gentle, loving. He sounded like the boy I used to trust with anything. But I knew better now. I told him I'd think about it. It was a big decision, after all. He smiled, relief flooding his face. Said we could visit Oak Ridge Haven next week, just to look around. I nodded, started clearing the dishes, and told him I planned to call Nancy later to check on her. Actually, Mom, he said, Amanda wanted me to tell you that Nancy's resting. The doctor says she shouldn't have visitors yet. Of course. Keep me away from the one person who might remember what really happened. After Jason left, I sat in my study, staring at the framed photo of my late husband on the shelf. The timing fit too perfectly. They'd waited until I sold the company to make their move. If I died even a few months ago, the money would have gone straight to Jason anyway. But now? If they could prove I was incompetent or unstable, they'd get it sooner. My phone rang again. Robert King, my attorney of 20 years. He asked how the retirement party went. I told him it was eventful and that I needed to see him immediately. Is everything all right, Karen? He asked. I looked out at the garden my husband had planted years ago, the roses blooming wild but strong. I told Robert the truth. I'm not sure, I said, but I think I'm about to find out. When I hung up, I made a promise to myself. If Jason and Amanda wanted to play games with my life, they'd soon learn I'd been playing a much longer, far deadlier one. They thought I was old and easy to manipulate. They were about to find out that experience is the most dangerous weapon of all. Robert King's office sat high above downtown, all dark wood, glass, and quiet authority. I'd sat in that same leather chair through the biggest turning points of my life, buying my first house, incorporating my business, signing my husband's estate after his death. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, I was there because my own family had turned into predators. Robert's assistant brought coffee, closed the door, and left us in silence. He watched me carefully, the way good lawyers do when they sense a story coming that might change everything. I told him everything. The champagne, Nancy's collapse, Amanda's sudden act of compassion, Jason's visit that morning, and the carefully rehearsed sales pitch for Oak Ridge Haven. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set his pen down slowly. You're certain about what you saw, he said, more a statement than a question. I told him I was as sure as I was sitting in that chair. He exhaled through his nose, thinking. The problem, Karen, is evidence. Without testing that bottle, there's no physical proof of what Amanda did. Even if we could prove Nancy was poisoned, Amanda could claim it was some supplement, some harmless additive. Then let's test it, I said. He nodded, but his face stayed serious. Even then, he continued, it wouldn't prove Amanda meant to poison you specifically. She could claim she mixed it up, or that someone else used her glass. It's a legal nightmare. So even if she tried to kill me, she could walk away free. Attempted murder is hard to prove without clear intent, he said. But that's not the only danger here. You mentioned Jason and Amanda's talk about retirement communities. That's a red flag. He leaned forward, hands clasped. If they can't get your money one way, they'll try another legally. They could claim you're showing signs of diminished capacity. File for guardianship. Once a court agrees, they'd control your person, your assets, everything. My stomach twisted. So Oak Ridge Haven wasn't just about convenience. It was about control. What do I need to do? I asked. Robert stood and opened a cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. First, we document your competency. I'll schedule an evaluation with a geriatric psychiatrist who's reputable, not one they can buy off. That way, if they ever try to challenge your capacity, we have a baseline on record. Then, we strengthen your estate. For the next 2 hours, we went through every safeguard imaginable. New trusts, updated wills, medical directives, restricted power of attorney, all ironclad and impossible to manipulate. Robert was thorough, calm, methodical. By the time we finished, my assets were protected like a fortress. Before I left, he gave one last piece of advice. Karen, you need to think about your safety. If they tried once, they'll try again. He handed me a card for a high-end security firm that specialized in wealthy clients. Cameras, motion sensors, panic buttons, he said. If they come for you again, make sure you see them coming. I drove home with that card sitting on the passenger seat. The city lights blurred past the windshield as my mind replayed everything, the look in Jason's eyes, the tremor in Amanda's hand, the way they whispered together when they thought I wasn't watching. My phone rang. Amanda's number. Her voice was bright, overly cheerful. She said Nancy was home from the hospital, resting comfortably, though she didn't remember much. The doctor said that was normal. How convenient, I thought. I told her I was relieved, that I'd love to visit Nancy soon. Oh, she's really not ready for visitors yet, Amanda said quickly. Maybe in a few days. Of course, I said. Tell her I'm thinking of her. After the call ended, I sat in my car for a long minute, staring at the house I'd lived in for 30 years. The same house my husband and I bought when Jason was 10. We'd built our lives inside those walls. Now, it felt like a trap I needed to reinforce. The next morning, 3 technicians arrived in unmarked vans. They spent all day wiring the property, installing cameras, alarms, motion detectors, and an emergency button linked directly to the police. I told the neighbors I was having problems with package theft. A believable enough lie. By afternoon, my home was safer than a bank vault. But the rail protection arrived at 2 o'clock when Robert's courier delivered the new legal documents. The updated will. The new trust. The healthcare directives. All properly witnessed and notarized. If Jason and Amanda wanted my money, they'd have to wait a long time, and they'd get far less than they expected. The new structure gave Jason a modest annual income, $50,000 a year, enough to live on but not enough to buy another luxury car. The rest of my fortune was redirected to charities and medical research. As for Amanda, she got nothing. I was reviewing the paperwork when the doorbell rang again. Through my new security monitor, I saw them, Jason and Amanda, standing on the porch, side by side, looking uneasy. I opened the door and stepped aside. Come in, I said. They sat in the living room. Amanda perched on the edge of the couch, one hand gripping her purse. Jason's eyes flicked toward the new camera in the corner. New security? He asked. Package theft, I said smoothly. You can't be too careful. Amanda cleared her throat. We wanted to talk about what happened at the party, she began, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. Yes, I said. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, pretending to compose herself. We feel terrible. If something we brought made my mom sick, I just don't think I could forgive myself. I watched her performance like a critic watching a bad play. I'm sure it wasn't anything you brought, I said. But what if it was, Jason added, leaning forward. What if it was the food or champagne? What if you had been the one to drink it? I smiled faintly. Then I suppose I'd have to be more careful about who serves my drinks. He didn't laugh. Neither did Amanda. The tension thickened until she finally said it. We just think it would be better if you stayed with us for a while. Until things settle down. So there it was. Step 2. That's kind, I said, but I'm perfectly safe here. Amanda's voice hardened. Are you though? You're 70, living alone. What if something happens? Jason joined in, his tone matching hers. A fall. A heart attack. Anything could happen, Mom. At my age, they said it like I'd already started the countdown. You're right, I said calmly. Anything could happen. That's why I spent today updating my will. The room went dead silent. Your will? Amanda asked, her voice suddenly tight. Yes, I said, as casually as if I were discussing the weather. A little brush with mortality makes a person think. I realized it was time to make some adjustments. Jason's face lost all color. Adjustments? Just a few changes to reflect my current priorities. You understand. No one spoke. The air in the room was heavy enough to crush glass. Finally, Amanda managed a polite smile. I'm sure whatever you decided was for the best. I think so too, I said. They left a few minutes later, promising to call soon. I watched from my monitor as they sat in their car for nearly 10 minutes, arguing in low, angry voices. Amanda gestured wildly with her phone. Jason tried to calm her down. Then they finally drove off. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat back, feeling the smallest flicker of satisfaction. They thought I'd play the helpless old woman forever. They thought they could outsmart me. But they were about to learn that I was far from finished. Phase 2 of my plan was already in motion. And this time, I wasn't waiting for them to make the next move. The next morning, I got a visitor I didn't expect. When I opened the door, Nancy Brooks stood on my porch. She looked pale but steady, clutching a small purse against her chest like it was keeping her upright. Her hair was pulled back, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp. Karen, she said, I need to talk to you. It's about that night. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room, the same room where Jason and Amanda had tried to play concerned children the day before. I made tea, mostly to give myself time to study her face. Amanda told me I had some sort of bad reaction to medication, Nancy said finally, settling into the chair across from me. But that doesn't make sense. I don't take any medication, just vitamins. Haven't in years. I felt my heartbeat pick up. So she was starting to suspect it too. What do you remember about the party? I asked. Everything, she said. I remember laughing with your friends, then feeling dizzy. The champagne tasted odd, bitter, metallic. And I remember seeing Amanda near the drinks table, doing something with a small bottle. My pulse quickened. What kind of bottle? I asked. Like one of those dropper bottles for essential oils, she said, her hands trembling slightly. Karen, I think Amanda tried to poison you. I asked why she thought that. Nancy gave a short, bitter laugh. Because she's been talking about your money for months. How unfair it is that you have so much while they struggle. How much easier life would be if something happened to you. I leaned back, letting her words sink in. Did she ever say anything specific? I asked. Nancy nodded. Last month she asked me if I knew whether you'd updated your will recently. She said Jason was worried he wouldn't get what he deserved. Her voice dropped. Karen, I think they've been planning this for a while. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I made a decision. Nancy, you deserve to know the truth. I saw Amanda pour something into my glass that night. I switched our drinks. Her face went white. You mean she tried to kill you and I drank it instead? Yes. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. What are you going to do? She asked finally. I took a slow breath. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, I said. Just not the way they expect. Nancy frowned. What do you mean? It means your daughter and my son are about to learn that greed has a price. After she left, I made a phone call to an old contact, Diane Collins, a private investigator I'd used back in my business days. Diane specialized in digging up information people thought they'd buried deep. She answered on the second ring. Karen Miller, she said, I heard about your sale. Congratulations. Thanks, Diane. I need a personal favor this time. What kind of favor? She asked. I need to know everything about my son's finances. His accounts, his debts, his investments, everything. There was a pause. Karen, are you sure? That's not the kind of truth you can unhear. I'm sure, I said. Give me 48 hours, she said. When I hung up, I sat in my study, staring out at the garden. The roses were starting to wilt in the early summer heat, their petals curling at the edges. Everything dies eventually, I thought. Some things just need a little help along the way. That afternoon, I called Jason. I asked him to meet me for lunch at our old favorite restaurant, the place we used to celebrate milestones. He sounded cautious, but agreed. When I arrived, he was already there, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to be nervous. "Mom," he said as I sat down, "you sounded serious on the phone." I told him I'd been thinking about what he and Amanda said. About my safety. About planning for the future. His face lit up, relief spreading across it like sunlight. "That's great, Mom. I'm glad you're thinking about that." I told him I'd looked into Oak Ridge Haven, that I'd even called them. He looked almost giddy. "They said they had one suite left," I continued, "but they need an answer fast." He nodded eagerly. "That's perfect. You'll love it there." I smiled. "There's just one thing," I said. "They require a power of attorney on file, someone to make financial decisions in case I can't." "I was hoping you'd take that on." He didn't hesitate. "Of course, Mom. Whatever you need." Perfect, I thought. He believed he was walking me right into their plan, but really, he was walking straight into mine. 2 days later, Diane called. Her voice was tight. "Karen, you might want to sit down for this." "Go on," I said. "They're drowning," she told me. "The house has 2 mortgages and a maxed-out home equity line. Credit card debt over $80,000. Jason's business hasn't turned a profit in 2 years. They've been using one card to pay another." That didn't surprise me. I'd seen the signs: fancy clothes, luxury cars, endless vacations, all on borrowed money. "Anything else?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Amanda took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago, $500,000, with herself listed as the beneficiary." My blood ran cold. "How is that even possible?" "She claimed insurable interest as your caregiver," Diane said. "The insurance company probably assumed Jason was the real beneficiary." There was more. "Jason's been making regular payments to a psychiatrist, Dr. Mark Reynolds." "A psychiatrist," I repeated. "For what?" She didn't know. But the payments were small and consistent. I told Diane to send me everything she had. When I hung up, I sat perfectly still for a long moment. The pieces were starting to fit together. The poison. The rush to move me into Oak Ridge Haven. The insistence on power of attorney. The psychiatrist. It was all part of one plan. And they had no idea that I now knew every detail. That afternoon, Jason and Amanda came over with a folder of paperwork. They spread it across my dining table: contracts, forms, printed brochures. Amanda was talking fast, explaining every page like she was leading a sales pitch. Jason nodded along, chiming in at the right moments. "This is the admission contract," Amanda said. "This one lists all your assets for financial verification." I scanned the pages, pretending to be interested. "And this," Jason added, sliding another document toward me, "is the power of attorney form. It's standard, just gives me authority to handle your affairs if something happens." I read it carefully. The document wasn't just standard. It gave him immediate control of my accounts, investments, and property the second I signed. "This seems broad," I said. "Do I really need to give you this much control?" "Mom, it's just precautionary," Jason said. "The facility requires it. Besides, at your age, it's better to have someone younger handling things." "At my age." They said it so easily, like it was a magic phrase that erased decades of competence. "What if I change my mind?" I asked. "Can I revoke it?" Amanda hesitated. "Well, technically, yes. But Oak Ridge has strict rules about residents leaving once admitted. There's a process. Medical evaluations. Waiting periods. You know how it is." "Of course," I said, smiling. "I'll think about it overnight." Jason tried to press. "Mom, we need to submit this by tomorrow if you want the spot." I told him I'd have my answer in the morning. When they left, I called Robert King. "Robert," I said, "what do you know about a psychiatrist named Dr. Mark Reynolds?" There was a pause. "Karen, that name rings a bell. He's a geriatric specialist, handles mental competency evaluations for older patients." "Why?" "Jason's been paying him for months," I said. Robert's voice grew sharp. "Be careful. Reynolds is known for siding with families who claim their elderly relatives can't manage their finances. Once he files that kind of report, it's hard to reverse. So that was it. The full plan. Poison didn't work, so now they go for guardianship. The moment I signed those papers and moved into Oak Ridge Haven, Reynolds would declare me incompetent, and Jason and Amanda would control everything. I told Robert the first needed something drafted by morning. Something that would teach my family a lesson they'd never forget. That night, I sat in my study long after midnight, going over every detail. Every signature had to count. Every word had to trap them, just like they'd tried to trap me. By dawn, the plan was perfect. Tomorrow, Jason and Amanda would walk through my door thinking they'd won. But they'd already lost. Friday morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that makes the air feel still before a storm. I'd been awake since dawn, calm and focused. Everything was ready. Every document signed, every call made, every step in place. At exactly 9, the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. Jason and Amanda stood outside, dressed neatly, both wearing the same forced smiles people use when they're about to lie. I opened the door, stepped aside, and said, "Come in." Jason carried a leather briefcase. Amanda clutched her tablet. They moved like salespeople closing a deal. Jason asked if I'd made my decision. I told him I had. We sat in the living room. I laid the papers neatly on the coffee table, the Oak Ridge Haven forms, the financial disclosures, and, most importantly, the power of attorney document. "I think you're right," I said, keeping my tone light. "It's time for me to start a new chapter." Amanda nearly glowed. "Oh, Karen, that's wonderful," she said, hands trembling from excitement. Jason's relief was visible too. He said this was the best decision I could make, that I wouldn't regret it. I smiled back. "I'm sure I won't." For the next hour, we went over every page. Amanda typed information into her laptop, asking for account numbers, balances, and passwords, pretending it was all routine. Jason double-checked signatures and nodded approvingly. When we were done, I placed the papers in a neat stack and said, "There's just one last thing. I need to finalize some additional documents with my attorney, something about tax implications." "Do you want us to come with you?" Jason asked. "No need," I said. "He's coming here." Right on cue, the doorbell rang. But it wasn't Robert King standing outside. It was Detective Erica Price and another officer. Detective Price showed her badge. "Mrs. Miller, we need to talk about an incident that occurred at your home earlier this week." Jason froze. Amanda went pale. "What kind of incident?" Jason asked. "A suspected poisoning," the detective said. "We received hospital toxicology results from Green Valley Medical Center. The patient, Nancy Brooks, had ingested a concentrated amount of oleander extract. That's not medication. It's a deadly poison." Amanda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jason stared at her in disbelief. The detective continued. "We also tested the remaining champagne from your party. It contained the same substance. Someone deliberately poisoned that bottle." The room went silent. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Detective Price turned her gaze toward Amanda. "The glass with the highest concentration of poison matched fingerprints belonging to you." Amanda's voice cracked. "That's insane. Why would I poison my own mother?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," the detective said. "Especially since we also found evidence of a $500,000 life insurance policy you took out on Mrs. Miller 6 months ago." Jason turned toward her, horrified. "Amanda, what did you do?" I stood slowly, holding my composure. "I saw her put something in my champagne glass that night," I said quietly. "But I switched our drinks." Jason's head snapped toward me. "You knew? You knew she was trying to poison you?" "I've known for days," I said. "And I also know about your debts, the psychiatrist, the plan to have me declared incompetent." Jason's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came. Detective Price stepped forward. "Amanda Brooks, you're under arrest for attempted murder." Amanda screamed as they handcuffed her, twisting against the officer's grip. "You think you're clever," she spat. "You have no idea what you've done." "Actually," I said, "I know exactly what I've done." When they took her away, Jason sank onto the couch, shaking. His eyes looked lost, hollow. "She told me it was just about protecting you," he said weakly. "She said you were getting forgetful, that we needed to handle things before you got taken advantage of. I looked at him, my voice flat. And you believed her. He buried his face in his hands. We're in debt, Mom. Everything's falling apart. She said if something happened to you naturally, we could start over. I didn't know she'd do this. I said nothing. Let him sit in the silence he'd earned. After a long pause, I told him to hand me his phone. I scrolled through his messages with Amanda. They told the truth he couldn't say. Conversations about me. About moving me out quickly. About not waiting much longer. When I handed the phone back, he looked like a man who'd just seen the edge of his own grave. I told him the power of attorney documents he'd just signed were fake, prepared by Robert specifically for this meeting. They gave him control of one account with exactly $1 in it. The rest of my assets, I said, are locked in trusts you can't touch. And if you're convicted of conspiracy, you lose everything. Jason whispered, "You've destroyed my life." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed it yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine in the process." He didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at the floor, while outside, the sound of police sirens faded away. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not happiness. Not victory. Just peace, the calm that comes when the storm finally breaks and you're still standing. And I promised myself one thing as I watched my son's shoulders shake. I would survive this too. 3 months later, the house was quiet again. No police, no lawyers, no family drama. Just me, my garden, and the sound of the wind brushing through the roses my husband once planted. Amanda got 15 years for attempted murder. Jason 3, for conspiracy. Justice felt less like triumph and more like breathing after nearly drowning. Chloe called last week, her voice soft and careful. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't know any of this. Can I come visit this summer?" I told her I'd love that. She still had a good heart, untouched by her parents' greed. Nancy and I met for coffee often. 2 women who'd survived betrayal and walked away smarter. She joked about writing a book. I told her to make sure the villains weren't too stupid, or no one would believe it. Robert King handled everything perfectly. The trust was untouchable now. If anyone ever tried to declare me incompetent, my entire fortune would go straight to charity. One evening, he brought good news. The insurance policy Amanda took on me was voided. Her scheme erased completely. I thanked him, then poured myself a glass of wine and sat outside as the sunset painted the sky gold. At 70, I'd learned something simple but powerful. Age doesn't make you weak. Trusting the wrong people does. They'd underestimated me. That was their mistake. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's quiet. It's waking up every morning free, safe, and in control of your own life. And that's exactly how I plan to stay. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below and don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.